Hey, what's going on, everyone? Ronnie, Landis here, and I wanted to bring you guys a really important message that I've been thinking about a lot lately and studying, researching, and meditating on, and actually having conversations with other people that have been thinking about this too. And it's the effects and dangers of high-speed internet porn and the effects that it has on all the different branches of our life. Physiologically, there's a lot of huge issues that getting really hooked on the virtual reality or virtual perception of what reality is based on internet pornography, the effects that it has on our neurochemistry. There's a lot of research that's come out about how internet porn actually affects our neurotransmitter systems. It affects our nervous system. It actually affects the hormone systems in our body and starts to cause a dysregulation of our androgen hormones, otherwise known as our sexual youthening hormones, like testosterone, like human growth hormone, things of this nature. It actually disempowers us physiologically and psychologically, almost in every way you can think of. And I wanted to bring 3 key points to the table and to help people understand a bigger picture of the implications of really getting, addicted to internet porn and the effects that it can cause on not just your life, but your relationships, your romantic relationships, the way that you're viewing the opposite sex based on a scripted virtual picture of possibly certain expectations that we place on a partner based upon what we see on the computer screen that, in all practical purposes, is not real. That's the one thing I want to put out there, is that internet porn is not real. It's a script. And that's just really important to understand. A lot of the things that we see on the internet that we get hooked up to because it creates a pleasure stimuli in our brain, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail. We get really addicted to that, especially in our adolescent years. You see, when we're forming our brain, our neurology, it's actually different anatomically and functionally based on the different years of development. And when we're in our adolescent years, before we're in our 20s, when we're in our teenage years, the structure of our brain is still developing. And the frontal lobes of our brain that are in charge of regulating, control, appetite control, for example, rationality, making rational decisions and weighing the pros and cons of our decisions, is not fully developed. And we're more in the best way to put it is in more of the survival mode, but more so to the effect that the part of our brain that is being really exercised more is the pleasure center of our brain. And so we think from a place of reward instead of consequence. So with that said, let me get into this. One of the biggest disadvantages of really getting into internet pornography is something called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I said it. Internet porn will start to influence your ability to get it up. And this is a very real phenomenon. In fact, it's affecting hundreds of thousands of people in the world. Studies and surveys are very clear on this. And there's people in their 20s and in their teenage years that are coming out more and more saying that they become erectile dysfunction. That's a huge issue. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest issues that we can think of. And a lot of it has to do with the stimuli that's being imprinted or impregnated on our mental computer. And then when we get into a real world sexual situation with another human being, we start to create artificial expectations for what that encounter should be like, especially if we're a teenager and we've never had a real sexual encounter. If your very first introduction into sex is, artificial and it's exacerbated into an extreme kind of fetish fantasy reality, that's going to set you up long term for some huge intimate relationship breakdowns. I want to put that out there. Internet porn and a lot of this virtual reality stuff that we get hooked onto creates a disassociation from reality. And I think we all need to get back to what's real, what's solid, what's practical and rational. And when we're in a real situation, but we're influenced by that artificial matrix, we tend not to consider the emotional implications that may have on, a romantic partner. And a lot of relationships end up breaking down because of this very one factor. So I'm going to put that one out there. Let's get into some of the more technical physiological disempowering effects of high-speed internet porn. The one thing that I want to say is that our brain can operate within something called neuroplasticity. So there's a very interesting concept. Nerve fibers or nerve cells that wire together fire together. So when we expose ourselves to certain stimuli, certain information, certain surroundings, or certain people, it sets up a wiring station that wires information that it's most consistently familiar with. So if that information is high-speed internet porn, again, that's artificial, we're going to be setting up a wiring station that's going to start actually myelinating that information to become more consistent in the feedback loop of our brain. And this to me is one of the most important critical factors of this conversation. And one thing I want to put out there too, because I really hope this message gets out to a lot of the younger people out there, that this is actually affecting more so than anyone else. The younger the user, the faster that the brain myelinates the neurochemistry to fit the virtual porn reality. And this causes an adolescent to actually have lowered stimuli, ultimately erectile performance, in a real world situation. And it starts to inhibit their ability to perform. So the brain is very flexible, it's very malleable, and when you're saturating it with images that are stimulating your pleasure center in your brain, it's going to set you up to fail in every situation that you get into with a real woman. Or, this affects women as well. It affects them differently, but it definitely affects both sexes. So make no mistake. The next thing I want to put out there is, this is probably the most important aspect of this whole thing, and it's all important, is that internet porn, very simply put, depletes your dopamine. And this is that neurotransmitter recycling station in the brain where we have neurotransmitters. This is called neurotransmission. And these are basically like little brain and nervous system hormones. Dopamine, for example, is always associated as the pleasure hormone. There's a lot of other things going on with dopamine though. So when we're constantly stimulating ourselves with instant pleasure, instant gratification, it starts to actually hyper-stimulate our dopamine reserves, and over time it will recycle our dopamine out of our body, causing nervous system dysfunction. In fact, this is an interesting point because one of my big focuses in the world is actually neurodegenerative conditions. So that's when someone actually, their nervous system and their brain start to break down. And one of the most interesting cases is that of Parkinson's. Scientists and doctors in the neuroscience field are actually stating, and the research is very clear on this, when somebody loses their dopamine production in their body, meaning their body's ability to adequately produce dopamine on a regular basis, it turns into Parkinson's condition. And that's when we start to lose motor function. That's when the myelin sheath, the fatty tissue that insulates our nerve fibers, starts to get oxidized and broken down. The electrical signals from the brain to, our body start to get scrambled. So I'm putting it out. I'm going to put this out there. That I really contest that, activities such as high-speed internet porn and other varying activities that are instant gratification have a hyperstimulating effect on our nervous system and will start to lead us down the road of neurodegenerative conditions. So literally, high-speed internet porn will actually decrease your intellect. It will make you less smart. It will make you less cognitively focused, and it's going to start to affect all the different areas of your life. There's something called the HPA axis. This is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And without getting into a long thing about what that is, it's basically the center in our brain, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, that secrete different hormones for our body to upregulate and to rejuvenate, to repair, and to maintain our health and vigor and vitality and our cognitive function. Some of those hormones, specifically as thyroid stimulating hormone, is produced by the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Human growth hormone, testosterone, for example, and dopamine. And dopamine has a lot to do with your adrenal glands. So when someone becomes adrenally exhausted or adrenal burnout, they just, their sleep patterns are irregular. They just can't get their sleep cycles in check. They're pounding down coffee or whatever type of artificial stimulant just to keep going. That's an adrenal exhaustion. That has a lot to do with actually masturbating too frequently, and especially the hyper mental stimulation that comes from watching internet porn. Hence, porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I guarantee if you're having erectile dysfunction, there's an adrenal insufficiency, a deep adrenal insufficiency. And there's a lot of different things you can do to medicate this condition naturally. But what this video is about is just bearing out some of the obvious detriments of consistent usage of virtual artificial porn. And there's so many more things that I could get into. I feel like I have to cut myself off now because I don't want to fire hose everybody with information, but this is some of the most important information, in my opinion, that needs to start reaching out to people in the mainstream and reaching out to the next generation, because we live in a continuously evolving infertile society where people are not able to conceive babies. They're not able to literally get it up to have a real world, natural sexual interaction that is both holistic, it's harmonious, it's heartfelt, and it's based on reality. It's not based on some artificial, expression of our deepest, darkest, kind of disturbed fantasies in a lot of ways. And I would invite people to not just take my word for it, but to actually test it against your experience. Go out there, do some research. There's so much research on this subject out there. It's impossible to deny. And then common sense put into the conversation is, to me personally, as a 28-year-old man that has been in all kinds of different relationships, I understand this concept very intimately, and I've had many conversations with women and how they feel when they've had a partner or a boyfriend that actually had a real addiction to artificial internet porn, and the disassociation that it caused on an emotional and a psycho-spiritual level. This is very real, so I invite everyone to consider this. And if you are, watching internet porn, my invite to you, my challenge to you would be, take 2 weeks off. Just stop. Just say, hey, you know what? This guy may have a point. Let me just take the challenge here. Let me take two weeks off. I'm not even going to look at it. I'm going to go out. Maybe instead of doing that, you go out there and you start, working out more. It is definitely erectile dysfunction. It has a lot to do with our testosterone production, and when we work out and we do anabolic exercise, we start to increase our hormone symphony, and that's going to, that's really going to benefit you and help you to rejuvenate yourself both mentally and physically. So I'm going to stop right here. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm very passionate about this subject and helping people understand the deeper implications of getting hooked onto artificial stimuli, whether it's pornography, whether it's artificial stimulants that we're using to counterbalance the effects of different activities that we're, with lack of a better word, very much addicted to. And so that's about it. Leave your questions and comments below. I'm interested to see what you guys think about this.